All right, good evening, everybody.
Yes. She's going to remind me about this half a dozen times because I talk with my hands, so it's going to go everywhere. So, my name is Bryson Taylor. I am the associate publisher at New South Media, and I am your MC for tonight. It's my honor and privilege to be here. It's a great honor to introduce Mr. Bil Lepp. I didn't get a chance to tell him beforehand, but I met Bil Lepp 20 years ago next year. He was the speaker at my high school graduation. I was the senior class president who they offered up, let's see here, Don Nealon and Joe Manchin, and I was like, we want someone exciting, someone who will tell a good story and will inspire us and those kinds of things. And so we asked Bill to come speak, and he did a fantastic job. I still remember, don't punch the lard. But anyway, Bill is an award-winning storyteller, author, and recording artist whose tall tales and sharp wit have entertained audiences of all ages. You may recognize him as the host of the History Channel's Man vs. History, an occasional host on NPR's Mountain Stage, or from his always insightful column in the Charleston Gazette-Mail. He is a 5-time champion of the West Virginia Liars Contest. He has a knack for mixing humor and heart, spinning stories that make us laugh, think, and see a little bit of truth in every exaggeration. His books and audio collections, all 28 of them, have earned honors from the Penn Stephen Kroll Award to Parents' Choice Gold Awards, and he's even received the Vandalia Award, West Virginia's highest folk honor. His children's book, The King of Little Things, was a critical favorite, and by the way, a favorite of my 2-year-old son. And it was praised by the Wall Street Journal Publishers Weekly and chosen to represent West Virginia at the National Book Festival. I love this quote from Golden Seal magazine that once said, just as New Jersey has Bruce Springsteen, West Virginia has Bil Lepp. And so please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Bil Lepp.
Should I put this on somehow?
Try, and they're very directional.
Okay.
So,
do I need to hold it?
that's the best. If you don't turn your head a lot, it might be okay. We'll have to let the people online let us know.
Okay. Should I stand here? All right. Excellent. We'll do it this way for now. It's fascinating that you mentioned that I did the graduation out of Philip Barber High School. Class of 1996, I'm going to guess, unless you said it, then I'm not really guessing.
2006.
2006, that makes so much more sense. But you're the second person this year that has said that. So I met one of your co-graduates at Kanawha State Forest earlier this year, and the whole point of my speech was when the principal of the high school called me and asked me if I would do the graduation. First, I thought to myself, finally, you know, someone has realized that I should be speaking to young people. And then I thought, wow, it's been 18 years since I graduated from high school. I had dreams and aspirations. Maybe I should get busy on those. And then my next thought was there could be children in that graduating class that are children of people that I graduated with. And finally, my thought was I've been to, I think, 4 graduations, 1 high school, 1 college, 1 major university, and I went to my sister's graduation from Marshall. That's 4 commencement speakers. And I thought, I didn't say anything mean. I said I went to my sister's graduation. Right? And it gets better. I thought to myself, that's 4 commencement speakers. That's like an hour of your life. What bits of wisdom did you carry away from each one of those speakers? And the only thing I could remember is Chuck Yeager spoke at Marshall's graduation, and he told the graduating students that if you dive too steeply in a jet, the wings will come off. And I haven't had an opportunity to test that, but it is the one thing that I took away from any commencement speaker. So I said to myself, when I go do this speech at Philip Barber, I don't care if I accomplish anything else. I just want, if I meet a graduate 20 years later, for them to remember one thing that I said. And that one thing was,
Don't punch the Lord.
don't punch the lard. And twice this year, I've met people who said that, so I'm very excited. You don't seem to care nearly as much as I do, but I'm happy. All right, so I wrote this book, Halfdollar, and I wrote it almost 20 years ago. And to make sure that I wasn't the person at the book club who hadn't read the book the last couple of nights I've been reading it, and I haven't read it. I hadn't read it in between 2008 and now. And I thought that I didn't know how it was going to be. I told my wife, I'm afraid it's going to sound like something I wrote in junior high. And I came in last night and I was like, oh, it's way better than I thought. That guy's funny. So I am excited to be here to be able to talk about it. And this is my job. This is my full-time job. For the last 23 years, it's been my full-time job. I go all over the country telling stories. Almost all of my stories are based in this little town called Halfdollar, West Virginia, which, how many of you actually read the book? Let's just, okay. So if you were real careful and you put all the clues together, you might have a rough idea of what the town of Halfdollar is actually based on. But I created it because when I was in graduate school, I met this guy named Skeeter, who some of you definitely know, some of you probably know. He does live in the greater Morgantown area. We did not know each other in high school. I graduated from Philip Barber High School, so presumably we were at the same sports events because he graduated from Morgantown High School, I'm gonna guess. And so probably we saw each other, but we didn't become friends until we were 25. And so I went back and I invented our childhood so that we could lie to our children about the things we did when we were their age. And I needed to put that somewhere. And so I was going to, I wanted to invent a town in West Virginia. And at first I was thinking of calling it something like coal or timber or, you know, some mineral that comes out of the earth. But then I realized that all of those names are taken in West Virginia. And I had on my desk a jar of $half. And I thought, I'll just call this town Halfdollar and we'll see where we go from there. So I invented the character of Skeeter. And the very first Skeeter story is how this book opens up. I'm 5 years old. My father teaches me that I go for a walk with my dad, who's walking the dog, and Deacon stops at every tree, fire hydrant, and lamppost along the way. He sniffs around the base of it, lifts his leg, and do his thing. And I say, Dad, what's that about? And Dad says that's the way Deacon marks his territory. He leaves his scent on those things. And then if another dog comes into this neighborhood, he smells that. He knows this land belongs to Deacon. He'll leave it alone. I said, well, what if that dog wants the land? And Dad said, well, then he leaves his mark. And the next time Deacon and that dog get together, they either talk about it or they fight about it to see who gets the land. Well, I was 5. Didn't make much sense to me. But it did give me a whole new perspective on what real estate agents did all day long. So that was the very first thing that I ever wrote as far as a $half and or a Skeeter story. And then I have this neighbor, her name is Mrs. Crankberry. She's the single meanest woman I have ever met. I don't know if it says this in the book, but in the story, she is the chairwoman down at the church for the committee for little old ladies who want to be angry about something. And because of that, because of the great yin yang, she has the most beautiful yard I had ever seen. And I want to go in her yard, but I'm not allowed to go in her yard. If I go in her yard, she will beat me up. And this was back in the 1970s when it was perfectly legal to hurt your neighbor's children. So one day I'm sitting in my yard. She has a big oak tree in her yard. And I notice she comes out of her house. She goes away. I get up out of my yard, go into her yard, go to that oak tree, get down on my hands and knees, and I sniff all the way around the base of the tree. Then I stand up, drop my pants, and make that tree mine. And it occurs to me that I have never once seen Mrs. Crankberry tinkle on that tree, so I don't even know if it belonged to her. But I do know that I was 5, but she was like 105. So I figured if it came to it, I could take her in a fight. And so I sneak over there every couple of days and make something else mine. and then she dies. I don't think it has anything to do with me going to the bathroom in her yard, but I can promise you that within 2 weeks of her death, everything 18 inches and below in that yard belonged to me. So you can see that came as quite a surprise when I came home from the grocery store one day and there was a moving van parked out, people moving stuff in. I go in the backyard, there's a little kid about my age putting toys out all over the place. That's the last straw. I go over to the tree, I drop my pants, I start going, the kid comes over, he drops his pants, he starts going, I know what I have to do. I reach over and I slug him as hard as I can. He slugs me back. Next thing you know, you got 2 5-year-old boys with their pants around their ankles fighting to the death. Well, pretty soon our mother saw us, and you know how mothers are about stuff like that. They came over and broke us up, made us apologize to each other, pull up our pants, and introduce ourselves. Now, I got to tell you, I felt like I knew that kid pretty well by that point. So after that, Skeeter and I, his name was Skeeter Barth, and Skeeter and I become best friends. And so that's where the world of Halfdollar and the Skeeter story started. And since then, I wrote that story, I'm going to say I wrote that story in 1997. And I wrote it, I was a pastor for a very short period of time. No, I wasn't a pastor, I was a preacher. And here's what I mean by that. My dad is a retired pastor. He spent 35 years in the ministry. And I spent 4 years. I was really good on Sunday morning from the pulpit. Dad was really good about going out in the community and loving people. And what I figured out is I liked preaching, but I didn't like pastoring because I just don't care about you. And so I had to give that up. But for a brief time, I was a preacher. And I wrote that story while I was preaching in a little town called Meadow Bridge, West Virginia. And so since then, I've probably written, I don't know, I mean, there's at least 24 hours of Skeeter stories. And several of them creep up in this book. And what was interesting to me was how some of the germs of some of the stories I tell now are in this book, but have completely changed and I think would be unrecognizable. Some of them were unrecognizable to me till like driving up here today. I was like, hey, wait a minute, that's where that came from. And then, so Skeeter and I are obviously the main characters. And then another character that plays a prominent role is Sheriff Hasbro. And Sheriff Hasbro, when I invented him, he was someone that Skeeter and I were going to play with, which is why his name is Hasbro, because that's a toy company. Yeah. So he was going to be someone that we toyed with, that we played with. And over the years, he has actually become one of my absolute favorite characters. He's turned into this really, I mean, he does it a lot in this book. This might have been where he started to shift into a great guy, someone that I really love, because he's really taken on a different role. He's not someone we toy with. He's not someone we play with. He's someone who, along with our fathers and mothers, really guided Skeeter and I into becoming much more decent people than we could have become. And so it's been interesting for me to watch that transition of Sheriff Hasbro. And then some of the other characters that don't make it into any other stories are interesting to me too, because I don't even know. A lot of my characters are named either for who they are, like Mrs. Crankberry. That's a combination of a cranky person and a cranberry. And Sheriff Hasbro is named because we toy with him. There's a character named Lynn in this book, that's my wife's middle name, so that's how she got in there. There's at least one other person who's in this book. I don't know, did you recognize your name when you came across it?
I don't think so.
Okay, yeah. So that's because it's in Latin.
Right.
But there are other characters in there that have names, and I don't have any idea who they're based on. I think I may have just made them up, which is interesting to me, because often when I make up a character that's not based on anybody, they're just because I need someone to be a foil in my story. And these people aren't really foils, they're just super ancillary characters. So I wrote the book, and I'm going to do question and answer later, so be prepared for that. I wrote it, and it took several years. Well, it took a long time to write it. When I finally sat down to decide I wanted to write a novel, I think it probably took me a year and a half. And I actually got an agent, which was fascinating to me. I don't know if you've ever tried to publish a book, but it's really, really difficult to get a book published. And it's getting harder and harder. I mean, the internet isn't helping. Ever since I was 4, I wanted to be a writer, or ever since I was in the 4th grade. But what I found out was, most of you are old enough to recognize this. In those days, it was very difficult to get anyone to read anything that you'd written, because you had to type it out on a piece of paper and then carry it in your pocket. And if you went up even to your mother and said, will you read this? She would say, when I'm done doing the dishes. And you knew she was never going to read it. And now there's a lot of forums where you can go on the internet and you can publish all sorts of things, and people come along and don't read it there. But you don't have to carry it with you anymore. So I always wanted to be a writer, and I entered the Liars Contest for the first time in 1990. My older brother Paul had done it, and I remember I was sitting in my dorm. I went to Wesleyan, and I was sitting in my dorm thinking I could enter the Liars Contest, but then I'd have to have a story, so I'd have to walk to the library, which is a solid quarter mile away, and go through the card catalog and find a bunch of books on stories and read those stories and learn one of those stories. And I thought, that's a lot of work. And then I remembered, hey, you want to be a writer, why don't you just sit here and write a story? And so I wrote a story for the Liars Contest, and I went and I did it, and I won 2nd place. And what I learned is that if you write a story and learn to say it out loud, people have to listen to you unless they can't outrun you. So I write my stories and I wear running shoes. And so that progressed for 10 years. I was creating my first stories, which, and eventually I kind of honed in on this $50 idea. But what I was saying was, it's when I was young and still had hope in the world, I thought that what you did is you write a book and you send it to New York City, and then you become rich and famous. One of my favorite quotes about the publishing industry or the writing industry is, you can make a fortune in the publishing industry. Wait a minute, how's this going? It's my favorite and I don't know it. I'll think of it later. And it'll be really impactful when I come swinging out with it. Right, you can make a fortune, but you can't make a living. That's what it is. So it's one or the other. You can either be Stephen King or John Sanford, or you're nobody at all. And I actually, for a very brief moment, I had an agent that was taking this book around to the major publishing houses in New York City. A friend of mine, Sheila K. Adams, she's a storyteller and musician and balladeer out of North Carolina. She had just published a book that did really well, and she helped me get in contact with her agent. And so my agent was shopping this around to the major houses. And as it says in the prologue of this book, it was originally written in the first person. The character Edison used to be I. And at that same time, I don't know how many of you remember the scandal around a book that came out called, I think it was called Running with Scissors. And it was supposed to be a memoir, and it did really, really well. And then it turns out that the guy made up half of it. And so then there was a huge scandal about people who lie writing their memoirs, or memoir, I don't know how you say that word. And so nobody would publish my book because it seemed too much like a memoir, even though it doesn't clearly say, but it could clearly say a novel on it. And because of that, I published it locally in Charleston from Courier Press, and there's no shame in that. But it was interesting because it was one of my brief opportunities where it could have gone big, but it didn't, because somebody else messed up. I should be able to mess up myself, is the way I feel about that. And so anyway, I then published it, and it didn't do great in the selling wise, but I liked it. And then, I don't know, like I said, I went 17 years almost without reading it. And every time I thought about it, I was like, yeah, I don't know if you like that book. And so I sat down, really starting earlier this week, and I read through it. And I got to tell you, I like it more than I thought I was gonna. And there were some parts where I really laughed out loud, which made me happy, because again, that guy's funny. And I don't know. What else do you want to know about it? Oh, this is gonna be a long hour. Come on, be brave. All right, I'll take a sip of coffee, and that'll give us all a moment. As I tell junior high school students, you can ask me questions, or we can stare at each other awkwardly. I'm fine with both. Yes?
So tell us, this, I don't think has anything to do with Halfdollar, but what was it you remember from your graduation?
Don't punch the law.
What's that mean?
Okay, I moved to Philippi for my senior year in high school. I lived in Dayton, Ohio for my junior high and junior year in high school. Then I went to Germany as an exchange student. I don't know. Anyway, I ended up going from Dayton, Ohio, which at that time had a population of 160,000 people, just the city. And then I went to Germany for a year, and then I came during that time. I remember on the airport tarmac, because this was a long time ago, my father said to me as I was getting on the plane to go to Germany, he said, while you're in Germany, we're going to move, and we're not going to tell you where. And I thought that was real funny. So one time I called home, and I got the old doo-doo-doo, the number you have reached has been changed or disconnected. And so I didn't know where my parents were for like 2 weeks. And then I finally got a letter that they had moved to Philippi. And so I came from Germany to Philippi. Now at that time, in 1987, Barber County, the entire county, had a population of 16,000 people. So the county had a population that was 1/10 of the city. And there was one stoplight in the entire county. I think there were two until recently. Somebody told me they took the one in Belington down because it just wasn't busy enough. And there were 2 restaurants in town. There was a Hardee's and a Kentucky Fried Chicken. Now, when I had been in Cologne, Germany, I was in the shadow of the Cologne Cathedral, and I found the greatest postcard I've ever found. It said, the prettiest place in Rome is McDonald's. The prettiest place in Cologne is McDonald's. The prettiest place in Paris is McDonald's. Moscow and Beijing don't have a prettiest place. And I sent that to all my friends in Dayton. And I just incidentally, in 1991, Russia, Moscow got its first McDonald's. And in 1992, the Soviet Union was officially disillusioned. So I think that tells you something. But I remember I sent that postcard to all my friends in Dayton. And then I moved to Philippi, and I would call my friends in Dayton. And I grew up in South Charleston, just so you know. We moved back to West Virginia. But I would call my friends in Dayton and say, there's no McDonald's. And I would hear them gasp. And I know that they were thinking that only a godless communist would live in a place where there was no McDonald's. And so I wanted a job, and I didn't want to work at Hardee's. So I applied to Kentucky Fried Chicken. And it took 8 months of applying to get a job, not because I don't have the skill set necessary to work in the back of a Kentucky Fried Chicken, but in 1986, Barber County was the poorest county in the country. And so most jobs that are traditionally taken by teenagers were taken by full-grown adults who are trying to feed a family. So it took a long, long time to get this job at Kentucky Fried Chicken. And one of the things that we did was, well, I'll just tell you this because I think it's funny. I always wore the same apron. I worked in the back because it was the 80s and the guys worked in the back. And it was one of those right after some marketing person had gotten the bright idea that when you went into a fast food restaurant, what you wanted most was to see the greasy-haired, pimple-faced, apathetic teenage boy who was in charge of making your food. And so we would walk in, I'd put on an apron, and the first thing I would do is go out to the parking lot, and I would get the hose and the heavy chemicals, and I would spray that on the antifreeze and oil stains, or I would pour the chemicals on the antifreeze and oil stain, and then I would take the hose and spray that into the creek, and it would all go away forever. And then I would go inside and I would pull out the big tray underneath the deep fryer, the big deep fryer, where everything that fell off the chicken fell into this tray. And I would get a saucepan and get 1 scoop of that sludge and put that on the prep table because that's what we made the gravy out of. And then I would take the rest of that, and beside the dumpster, there were 2 55-gallon drums. And I would put the rest of that in those drums. And once a month, Revlon would come by and pick that up. And that's what they make lipstick and mascara out of. So if you've ever been putting on your lipstick and your mascara and thought, ooh, I'd like some Kentucky Fried Chicken, now you know what. And then I would go in and I would make the chicken, and what you had to do was you had to, you put the chicken in the flour. It's a recessed pan in the table, and then you had to push it against your abdomen 21 times to force the flour into the skin. But I always wore the same apron, so my apron would be wet from spraying the parking lot. So by like Thursday, because I always wear the same apron, my apron would have like this 1-inch bulletproof thick flour shield, and I would have to like push it in front of me and then take a couple of steps. But we would, the oil that we deep fried the chicken in, I'm getting to the point here. The oil that we deep fried the chicken in, it came in, we would go in the back, and there were these cardboard boxes like this big, this big, this big, probably 80 pounds. And we would take that out and put it on the prep table, pull the cardboard down, and inside that, wrapped in blue cellophane, you would pull the blue cellophane, and there was just this perfect, beautiful alabaster square of lard. And if you bumped the table, it would just kind of go, oh, it was beautiful. And then you would get busy, and we would cut that up and put it in the deep fryer. But sometimes before you cut it up, you'd get busy. And so then it would just sit there. And there were 4 guys that worked back there. And I mean, it's just a man's nature that if there's something sitting there and it can't punch you back, you're going to hit it. And so we would punch the lard. And then there'd be like a fist print in it. And the next guy would have to make a deeper fist print, because that's how we are. And then we would have a contest where we would just see who could punch the lard the hardest. And it was me and this guy named Brian, who was about my age, and then this guy named Ken. Ken was the toughest person I ever knew. He was 35 years old probably at that time. He had left Barber County and gone down to North Carolina, got a job cutting trees. And his chainsaw bucked back and it cut him, and he didn't want to get fired. So he went home and he sewed it up himself, and he poured hydrogen peroxide on it, and that didn't work out. So he came back to Kentucky Fried Chicken, and he had 2 or 3 children. And so at that, I think we were making $3.35, and that's not young people. I'm not talking like 1850 $3.35. I'm talking $3.35 an hour. And so Ken was this big, and then our boss was named Jim or Joe. I can't remember which it was, but I know I changed it to protect his identity. So now I just call him Jim Joe. And so I punched the lard. My manhood wasn't really wrapped up in this. I punched the lard, you know, and then Brian punched the lard, and then Ken punched the lard. He didn't even try, but he punched the lard, probably went halfway in this block of lard. And now was Jim Joe was just this little guy. He was just a bitter person. I don't think it was his dream. I don't want to make fun of people that work at fast food restaurants. As I said in my, maybe you remember this part too, never make fun of anyone who has a job. People who are trash men or who work in fast food restaurants, it might not be their dream job, but they want a job bad enough that they're willing to do those jobs. Except I say that, but then I always think if I were the manager at Subway, like at some point during the interview, I would have to ask myself, do I think this person can make a sandwich? And sometimes the answer will be no. But anyway, Jim Joe was bitter, and he wanted to be big, he wanted to be tough, and he wasn't. But this was his chance to beat Big Ken, and Jim just threw this huge punch, and he just went in into the lard, and then his arm stopped, and we heard snap, snap, and he had broken both bones. And he pulled his fist, his arm out of the lard, and he held it like this, and he said to us, "I win." And then he got in the car and went to the hospital because he was management. And that joke's funnier when you hear the rest of the story. But so after that, at the Kentucky Fried Chicken, don't punch the lard or you punch the lard became an expression of self-destructive behavior. Like I might say, Brian, you really punched the lard when you wrecked your girlfriend's dad's car and you had that other girl in it. And so became an expression of self-destructive behavior. And so then I went on with my speech, and this is what this is what is in my story, but wasn't in the speech, but you may remember this also. So anyway, that's where punching the log comes from. And so, but I wanted to, as I said, I wanted to say to these children something that 20 years later they would remember. And it's just so, it's really, I'm not kidding. It is really, I'm so happy that not only one, but two people have said that to me this year, because I feel like I really accomplished something. So I get done speaking. And this is, we're at the Barber County Fairgrounds, because it's the only place large enough in Barber County to have everybody. Right in the, there's a big pavilion, and I don't know, 400 graduate, would you say there were 400 kids in your class?
Yes.
400 graduating seniors, and then all around them were 1,500 proud grandparents, parents, and annoyed and bored younger siblings. And then outside were like guys in cut-off jeans and sleeveless AC/DC t-shirts, smoking cigarettes and dipping snuff. I don't know what they were doing there. I think they were sitting around, and one of them said to the other, "What do you want to do tonight?" And the other guy goes, "I heard they're having commencement at the fairground." And the other guy said, "I ain't never been to one of those before." And then there was the principal, who I call Dr. Hohenfuss, because that's German for dog foot, and I think that sums that man up. And so I finished my speech, and I'm just like, you know, I'm waiting for mad applause, and I don't get it, because I mean, there's no more dangerous audience than 400 17-year-olds who don't want to be there. And so I go back to my seat, and I'm just sitting there depressed, and then it's time to give out the diplomas. And now I have to shake the hand of 400 17 and 18-year-olds. I don't want to shake 418. I know where those hands have been, and I don't want anywhere near that. It's like a Robin Cook novel, commencement. And so these kids start coming across the stage, and I'm like, now they'll recognize me. They line up alphabetically, which is the one thing that they learned in 13 years of American public school. And they're coming across, and we're handing out, shaking hands. None of them, they don't even know I was one of the speakers. And finally, there's this kid, and he's standing on the edge of the stage, and I think that he's wearing pants under his graduation gown. Because from his knees down, well, from his knees to the top of his untied combat boots, there's nothing. And there's nothing from it. And I think when they ordered the gown, it fit. But he had just had a growth spurt in between that time. And his physical maturity had far surpassed his like emotional and coordination. He's just standing there. And he was like 6'6", but he only weighed 100 pounds. And if he was standing sideways, you'd think he was a 1x12. And he's just kind of blowing in the wind. And I just want to, you can see his family. They're back there. I know he's like the first kid in their whole family to graduate from anything that didn't have like penitentiary in the title. And they're so excited. And they say his name, Keith Plum. And I'm just thinking, make it to us. If you can make it to us, Keith, we can each take you. There was like 12 dignitaries. We can each take your hand. We can get you across the stage without falling down. Just like Keith Plum, make it across the stage without falling down. Make it across. And then from back in the queue, or back in the Z's, like the WXYZ, way back in the back of the classroom, some kid yells out, "Hey, plum nuts, don't punch the lard." They remembered. And so that's where that comes from. And Keith did make it all the way across. You're not Keith Plum, are you? Do you know where Keith is today?
Yeah. He's in Billington.
All right, good.
I was a kid who yelled too.
Oh, yeah, what?
He wasn't big, but we were in the same line.
Okay, good. Well, what's I think even also interesting, so one of the reasons that the things in this book, to bring it back to this, a lot of the names have been changed. The principal of the high school is Dr. Hohenfuss. If you know anything about Barber County for 40 years, you know who the principal of the high school was. And I don't know if you're related to him. I'm done apologizing. And my dad always said that he was the only person in the county that was mean enough and dumb enough to be president, to be principal. So I changed his name, and I had to change a lot of names because you know West Virginia, it's a small place. We're all 2 or 3 people apart. And so everybody, especially, I mean, we're in Monongalia now, so we're just not that far from Barber County. Obviously, at least one of you is from Barber County. So I have to be careful to change the names of these people. Sheriff Hasbro is based on two people. One was a deputy sheriff in Fayette County, and the other was Frank. What was Frank's name from camp? Big Frank. He had a heart attack. We took him a hamburger and a pack of cigarettes in the hospital. I'm talking to Paula, not you. Anyway, Frank, Big Frank, that's who Sheriff Hasbro is based on. But so, you know, I don't, Gary Reed, who Hasbro is based on, he's proud as punch that he's a character in my book. But a lot of these characters, again, I had to change their name because I knew people in West Virginia would be reading this book. And so this whole Jim Joe thing, I didn't tell that story in Barber County or any of the counties that surrounded Barber County for 15 years probably, because I figured somebody knew somebody. But finally, I was at Buckhannon Upshur High School. I was speaking to the high school students. I'm like, none of these high schools, this was recently, like none of these high school students know anything about the Kentucky Fried Chicken in Philippi in 1987. And I go, Jim Joe, don't know his real name, forget, made it up, Jim Joe. Afterwards, this kid comes bumping down the aisle, and he goes, his name's Joe. And I go, how do you know? Because he's my mom's boyfriend. So it's been interesting. It's been interesting. All right, see? One question, good long answer. What else we got? Yes.
Why did you choose Wesleyan and what did you study while you were there?
I chose Wesleyan for the same reason the character in the book chooses Wesleyan. My dad was a minister. He got half off tuition. And we lived in Philippi, and it was, you know, 20 minutes away, half an hour away. So that's why when he said I could go to any college I wanted to, as long as it was Wesleyan. And I studied, I had 9 majors throughout the course of my 4 years. And I have a degree in early American history, and then a minor in theater. And that's just because I had to choose one of my 8 other majors to be a minor. I wanted to be an English major. Like I said, I wanted to be a writer, but we had to take a class that was called Milton or something like that. And I was like, no, I'm not going to spend the whole semester reading that, man. So I went with history instead. And then I ended up, I wanted to be a professor as well as a writer. And I remember I applied to graduate school, not the greatest student in the world. And my favorite rejection letter comes from Brown University. It started out at Brown, we only accept the brightest and most creative students. And then I got a rejection letter from a college on the other side of the river here. Is it on? Yeah. And it said, basically, you're rejected from the history graduate program. Call if you have any questions. So I did. I called. And the guy goes, oh, yeah, you can hear him rustling. He goes, oh, yeah, we unanimously rejected your application. So I ended up not getting a master's or a PhD in history. But I'm glad I studied early American history. It was good. I've enjoyed that. Yes.
Buck Dog was the subject of many of my favorite of your earlier works. I know he's gone for a while, but do you have any like secret Buck Dog stories that you're gonna unleash on the planet that you haven't yet?
Well, it wouldn't be secret if I told you. No, Buck Dog that's really the story that catapulted me into the, I went to the National Storytelling Festival in 2000, sort of the Broadway of storytelling. And I did a 15-minute spot. I told the Buck Dog story, and that's what catapulted me into this as a full-time career. And when my wife and I bought our first house, we got Buck Dog in 1996. We bought our first house in 2003. And Buck Dog had always lived outside because we rented. And I let Buck Dog in, and she's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, he's going to live inside. And she said, I don't know if I want the dog to live inside. And I said, honey, he bought this house. And so he got to live inside. But no, I don't have any. So I'll start working on it because now I'm ashamed. It's funny, we got another dog, Apollo, but as wonderful as he is, he's just never lent himself to the humor that Buck lent himself to.
Can you tell us about Dog story?
Oh my God. Yes. Hold on. It's funny, I wrote this story in 1992. No, that's not true. I wrote it in 1996. And I've told it a lot. You know, people say I've heard that story before, and I'm like, how many times do you think I've heard it? And it's the one story I tell that I really, really have to pay attention to, because I know it so well that I forget I'm telling it. And I start thinking I got to pick up a glass of milk on the way home, or even a jug, or you know, why would that person wear that in public? And then I start thinking, like, how many times has Mick Jagger sung Satisfaction? You know, but he gets a lot more money per time than I do. But yeah, this is the story that really got me into the storytelling world. I have a dog, and my dog's name is Buck, but Buck is not an ordinary dog. What you have to understand about Buck is that his mother was a German Shepherd, but his father was a prolific and extremely determined Basset Hound. I didn't really believe it myself, till one night I saw a Basset Hound running through the neighborhood with a step ladder tied to his back. But now, while Buck inherited his mother's good looks, he got his daddy's legs in the bargain. So he looks just like a German Shepherd that swallowed a Ford Fairlane. He's about a dog and a half long, but he's only about a half a dog tall. But what that dog lacks in good looks, he makes up for in nasal prowess. When it comes to smelling things, that dog is sort of a canine savant. I can hold down the plate of eggs I had for breakfast. That dog will sniff them, run out to the hen house, and find me the chicken that laid them. One time I let him smell one of those spicy chicken wings. Half an hour later, he was back in my living room with a bottle of Tabasco and a buffalo. You know that fairy tale about the princess that sleeps on the 12 mattresses and she finds the one with the pea on it? That's nothing. I guarantee you that even if you had 12,000 mattresses, it would take Buck less than a minute to find the one with the princess's pea on it. And that's a vegetable joke, in case you're offended. So I knew with a nose like that, that dog was bound to be the greatest hunting dog that ever lived. And the only thing keeping Buck from being a great hunting dog was the fact that he was gun shy. Every time a gun would go off, he'd run and hide somewhere. So I knew I had to cure him of that. And at first I tried all sorts of passive ways. He and I would sit up all night long reading Field and Stream articles to each other, and then we'd fall asleep watching hunting videos on the VCR. But none of that was working. So I decided I was going to have to take more drastic measures. And here's what I did. Now, this would have been April, about 20 years ago. We were thick in the middle of a cold spell. It was 14 degrees outside. Buck Dog was sound asleep in front of the fireplace. I took a piece of cardboard, drew a target on it, and I laid that on the compost pile in the backyard. I went inside, got my trusty 30-30 rifle, and one bullet. I woke up Buck Dog. I took a rope. I tied one end to his collar. I took the other end, and I tied that to my belt loop. We went outside. I held that bullet down there where Buck Dog could see it. He looked it over, sniffed it a couple of times, and when he was ready, he gave me a nod. Well, I loaded that bullet up in my rifle, took aim on that target, and blammo, I fired. Well, as per usual, I had failed to consider the full ramifications of my actions. And I can't tell you exactly what Buck was thinking, but as near as I can figure, he thought he was supposed to track that bullet. Because no sooner did that bullet leave the end of that gun than Buck Dog was after it. And I don't mean he was running after it, I mean he was flying after it, chasing that bullet through thin air. And when he got to the end of that rope tied from his collar to my belt loop, that rope snapped tight, pulled me out of my boots, I dropped my rifle, and I was flying right behind it. Well, Buck Dog chased that bullet right through the hole in the middle of that piece of cardboard. Then he drugged me head first to that pile of compost. Now, I don't know if you know what it feels like to be drugged head first to a pile of compost. Well, you're living in the same political times I am. But that bullet left that compost pile, went flying off into the woods. And every time it ricocheted off a rock or glanced off a tree, Buck Dog was there. As we were going through the woods, a big old branch reached out and just tore my shirt and jacket right off. Well, Buck Dog followed that bullet all the way down to the railroad tracks. Now, that would be Weirton's world-famous steel fastened into CS Next railroad tracks, running clear from Cowan to Grafton via Burnsville, Buchanan, Carrollton, and Philippi. And it just so happened that at that very moment, a 6-engine, 168-car CS&X monster train, loaded down with 19,364 tons of pure West Virginia bituminous coal, was rolling by. And that bullet slammed right into the side of one of those coal cars. Well, when Buck saw that, well, the buck stopped there. But I passed the buck. I went flying right by him, and when I did, that rope tied from his collar to my belt loop snapped tight one more time, and this time it just ripped my blue jeans right off. When I hit the side of that train, I was screaming, partly out of fear, but mostly because, like I say, it's 14 degrees outside. Suddenly I wasn't wearing nothing but my boxer shorts. Now, because I was screaming, my tongue was sticking out of my mouth. And because my tongue was sticking out of my mouth, it was the first thing to hit the side of that train. Well, I don't know if you've ever touched your tongue to a piece of cold metal in the dead of winter before, but I suddenly found myself frozen solid to the side of that train. I had my feet under me. I was kind of running alongside the train like this. I'm not proud of that, but it was cold. And I was barefoot, and pretty soon I lost my balance. And when I did, my feet flew out behind me. My right arm was flapping in the wind. I had my left hand on my boxer shorts because, well, I figured there were a lot worse things than my tongue to have frozen to the side of that train. And there's no way to clean that one up. But my mouth was wide open. That train was making about 20 miles an hour. The wind was blowing right in, taking all the saliva, washing it around my uvula, out my mouth, over my shoulder, across my cheek, over my shoulder, down my arm, until before I knew what was happening, there was a 50-foot wing of frozen drool sticking perpendicular from the right side of that train. Well, the wind started to catch up underneath that wing pretty good. And before long, I could see the wheels on the right side of that train starting to lift up off the track ever so easy. Well, we topped a hill and started down. That train started going 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 miles an hour. And I guess the lift and the drag and the rest of that aeronautical mumbo jumbo must have been just right, because all of a sudden, that train lifted off. If there had been anybody with me, they'd have certainly called us the wrong brothers. But now, I had never flown before, so I thought I'd see what I could do. And I took that train straight up, stalled out those engines, went into an inverted dive, pulled out of that into a loop-de-loo, and then I wrote my wife's name in the smoke real pretty, because I've always been a romantic like that. But then I started to get nervous, because like I say, I'd never flown before. I'd certainly never flown a train before. I figured the police were going to be wondering what I was doing flying that train around the sky. I thought to myself, the smartest thing you can do would be to land this train. So I reconnoitered the tracks beneath me, I straightened her out, and I headed in. And then I got nervous again, because I'd never flown a train. I'd certainly never landed a train. But then I just started saying to myself, I think I can. I think I can. I laid that train down just as pretty as you please. And right away, I went to feeling proud. And I think you probably all know what the good book says about pride. Pride cometh before the fall. And folks, this is where the real trouble started. Because you see, I looked up just in time to see that train was going into a tunnel. And that tunnel was built just wide enough for that train. And I was sticking out just far enough to the right side that my head collided directly with the rock face of that mountain. Well, I came to a sudden and violent stop. That ice wing shattered off, but that train was still going, and my tongue was still frozen solid to the side of it. I could feel my tongue getting pulled further and further out of my mouth. I could see that train slowing down under the strain. And I knew one of two things was bound to happen. Either that train was going to stop, or my tongue was going to get jerked right out of my mouth. And that's when I said, something has got to give. That's funny to you. Well, just then I heard a tremendous snap as my tongue, now stretched 40 feet long, tore itself free of the side of that train and came tearing down that tunnel like a giant rubber band bent for fury and just slingshotted me and it straight up into the sky. Well, by this time it was raining and snowing and sleeting pretty good. So it didn't take long for an 8-ton snowball to freeze solid on the tip of my 40-foot tongue. So there we were, the 8-ton snowball, the 40-foot tongue, and me in my boxer shorts. I reckon we looked something like a sucker on a stick flying through the sky. But pretty soon gravity caught up to us and we started heading down. It was kind of like parachuting, but it was kind of like having a hippopotamus for your parachute. We were headed straight for the ground at a pretty good clip when I noticed some power lines beneath me. I managed to wiggle and twist myself just right. I dropped right in between those power lines, and just before I hit the ground, that 8-ton snowball on the tip of my 40-foot tongue hung up on those power lines and caught me. I was just sort of hanging there. Little old Jaybird came and landed on my head. He and I were just looking around, waiting for someone to come and get me down, or spring to come and thaw out my tongue. Well, it was while I was looking around that I happened to notice a black bear coming out of his cave. Now, he was lean and hungry after a long winter's hibernation, and I could tell he was looking for something to eat. And when he looked up and saw me in my boxer shorts with that jaybird on my head hanging from those power lines, well, that bear just smiled. Near as I can figure, he thought we were some sort of R-rated pinata sent straight from heaven. And that bear reached into the hollow of a tree and pulled out an aluminum ladder and a baseball bat. I'll tell you what, that surprised me too. He set that ladder up underneath me and he commenced to climbing. And he did not stop until he got to that top step. That one that says, clear as day, do not stand here, you might lose your balance. He took that baseball bat, took a couple of practice swings, and just as he was coming around to deliver his death blow, I heard a rustling in the underbrush. Looked up just in time to see Buck Dog. Y'all remember Buck Dog? Buck Dog came charging out of the underbrush. Of course, on his short little legs, it's more like overbrush. But out of a deep sense of loyalty, Buck Dog bound up that ladder and he bit that bear right on the backside. Well, when Buck bit that bear, it knocked that bear off balance. He dropped that bat, started rocking back and forth on top of that ladder, and just before he fell, he grabbed a hold of my ankles. Now, when that bear grabbed hold of my ankles, with Buck biting his behind and him on the aluminum ladder, and me with the 40-foot tongue and the 8-ton snowball sitting on the power lines, well, that completed a 70,000-volt circuit that none of us had anticipated. The resulting explosion passed down my tongue, blew all the feathers off that jaybird, passed through me, blew the fur off that bear, blew the hair off Buck, and blew us all straight up into the sky one more time. So there we were. Let me recap for you just in case you missed anything. There's the 8-ton snowball, the 40-foot tongue, that naked jaybird. I was now as naked as that jaybird. And then there was the buck naked bear and the bear naked buck. All of us were streaking through the night sky like a comet. Now, eventually, everything got back to normal. We landed. Snowball melted, my tongue shrank, the bird got its feathers back, I got some clothes back, the bear got his fur back, Buck got his hair back. And if there's anything at all I learned from this situation, and it seems like the sort of thing I should have learned something from, I guess maybe sometimes it is best to just let sleeping dogs lie. So just a little behind the curtains. This is what I wear when I'm storytelling. I wear a t-shirt and a hat, and then I tuck my t-shirt into my jeans. And you think to yourself, why on earth would he make that decision? Well, when I first started storytelling, I basically had two stories. I had this one where I touch my hat as part of the joke, and if I don't have a hat on, I can't tell that story because it's an important joke in the story. And then in the Buck Dog story, I tie the rope to my belt loop, and so I have to have my shirt tucked in. And so for 8 years, those were my two big stories. And so I had to have a hat on, and I had to have my shirt tucked in, and I didn't want to wear a button-up shirt because that's just pretentious. And so, and then I got to the National Storytelling Festival, and I told that story, and things went really well. And then, this sort of became my uniform. And now if I go on stage and I don't have, like if I go on stage and I don't have a hat on, I'll have fans just yell out, like, where's your hat? It's like Tony Bennett one time was in, I don't want to shock any of you, but he's dead now. So Tony Bennett, that might have shocked you. Tony Bennett was in the airport in like Tampa, and he didn't have his toupee on. And some woman came up and just chewed him out. And she was like, you have a responsibility to your fans to look like Tony Bennett at all times. So people yell at me if I don't have a hat and I don't tuck my shoe. But that's why I wear this goofy outfit when I'm telling you. All right. What else we got?
I have a question.
Yes.
Excuse me, and I want to, we didn't tell you at the beginning, people who are online cannot hear the question if you don't use the little microphone that's on your table. So if you think of it, it'd be great if you do that. My question is a writing question. You said that Sheriff Hasbro turned out different than you initially intended. How do you as a writer experience your characters having a mind of their own?
That's a really interesting question. A lot of my characters, all of my characters, 98% of my characters get created because I need something fulfilled. I need someone to fulfill some position. And so most of them, well, I don't even know if it's most of them, maybe half of them go on to become more than I thought they'd ever be. And it's fascinating to me to have these emotional attachments to these fictitious people. I mean, I do it about characters that I read about too, you know, in other people's novels. Like 3 years later, I'll be thinking, I wonder what that guy's doing now. Like, oh yeah, the novel ended, he's not doing anything. Which is interesting because I tell this story where it involves the amygdala, and then I explain to the audience that the amygdala is where your emotions come from. I didn't know that. And then I always say, my wife says you didn't know that because you don't have any emotions. And I say, that's not true. Anger and annoyance are emotions. So I don't, like, you know, I think I have a different emotional set than a lot of people. So it is interesting to me when I become emotionally attached to my characters. And then, and it happens sometimes. I think a character is going to be really important and really going to grow and change things in my little world. And then that character just doesn't go anywhere, you know, like a real person. They just disappoint me. But then you can just quit writing about them. But with Sheriff Hasbro, I think it might have been in this book where he started to turn into someone that we admired. And I don't know, I was just writing, and I guess I don't even know if I was conscious of it at the time, but I just realized that Sheriff Hasbro was a better character if he cared about us, and we came to realize as younger people that this was a good influence in our lives, and someone who was not overtly teaching us, but definitely through his attitude and the things that he let us get away with and didn't let us get away with, that he was teaching us how to be better people. And one of the things that I want to do in my stories, a lot of my stories are tall tales. The buck dog story that I just told you, people tell me every story has a moral. And I'm like, I don't think that story has a moral. And they're like, I'm like, okay, don't lick a train if it's cold outside, right? But if you don't know that already, I can't help it. But what I do with my other stories, my Skeeter stories, my $50 stories, my main goal is to be funny. Most of my stories have some sort of tall tale element. I want to go into an audience and I want to just make people laugh for 50 or 60 minutes, not be overbearing, not hit you with a lot of political stuff, not, you know, because I think we're so divided at this point anyway. Isn't it great if we can just all sit here for 60 minutes and laugh? I think there's nothing, I've been accused of just being funny by other people on the storytelling circuit. And I'm like, you know what? You just be funny for an hour consistently for 25 years. Let's see if you can do it. And then somebody called me the jelly donut of storytelling. Like, that's an insult. I'm like, who doesn't like a jelly donut? So anyway, most of my stories, my main goal is to be funny. My second goal, and it's just like 1 degree under my main goal, is to represent West Virginia as positively as possible in my stories. So a lot of my characters are people that you are going to meet in Barber County or Fayette County or, I don't know, Montague County. But they look like mechanics, they look like coal miners, they look like farmers, they look like country sheriffs, they have accents. Like, that's one thing I changed in that book, is trying not to do dialogue, write in dialogue. But so I get up on stage, it's also partly why I wear this. I get up on stage, people who don't know me say, oh, that guy's a moron. And so that way, when I start talking about these characters that are morons, people are like, oh, he knows what he's saying, he's an expert. And so I start, and when my parents are from Ohio, which is why my accent is pure NPR. But my characters all have West Virginia accents to one degree or another. And so I deliberately, and I did the same thing in the book, you can't hear me in the book, but I deliberately present my characters so that they meet the stereotypes that I think the audience has. I don't know if you're aware of this, but people outside of West Virginia have a negative opinion of us. Maybe you didn't know that. So I let people think, oh, he's going to make stupid hillbilly jokes or whatever. And then my characters, doesn't matter if they're a mechanic or a mortician or the sheriff or whatever they are. They can quote Shakespeare, or they can quote Einstein's laws of physics, or whatever else they need to. They can tell you that geomorphology is the study that changes the Earth's surface over the time, and the natural geomorphic outcome for continents without beavers will be steeper valleys and deeper ravines due to the cutting erosive forces of water. So my characters, in their overalls, in their ball caps, with their t-shirts tucked into their jeans, can say that, which is part of my mission to tell people that West Virginians are way smarter than you think they are. But then I also say to audiences, and this gets a laugh, and the more conservative state I go to, the bigger a laugh this joke gets. I say, it would be dishonest of me to pretend that there are no dumb people in West Virginia. We have a legislature too. So there are some characters in this book and in my stories that are dumb and are mean, because there are people like that. It doesn't matter where you are, what country, no matter where you go, there are some mean, dumb people. Like Angus Fester, he's the mean dairy farmer in this story who loves cattle so much that he named all of his children after different breeds of cattle. So there's Angus Jr., Malby, Holstein, Guernsey, Longhorn, Jersey. And Longhorn and Guernsey are the twins. This doesn't make sense because Guernsey and Jersey should be the twins. It's my second favorite geography joke that I have. And then when Angus finally has a daughter, Helen, his wife, knows that Angus is going to name the poor girl after a breed of cow. And that's what, so she says, at least make it feminine. And that's where Charolais got her name. And so Angus is this horrible person in this book. And I mean, he's more horrible in the book than he is in the rest of my stories. He's clearly abusive, not sexually abusive, but abusive to his wife and all of his children. All of the sons are jerks. Helen is a good person, and Charolais is probably the strongest character in the book, the best person in the whole book. And so I wanted to show with that we do have, just like everywhere, we have these awful people. But, and this is in another story, but it applies here, Charolais, their last name is Fester. And so, she's always getting on me and Skeeter, because Skeeter and I come from good families where our parents love each other and everybody gets along, blah, blah. And so, as a result, both of us are just kind of, I don't know, ne'er-do-wells. Like, we don't try hard. We're C students when we don't necessarily have to be. And we just don't give our best effort. And so she chews me out one time because as a Fester, everybody knows who her family is. And everybody just expects her to live down to her family and the generations of her family that have come before. Everybody knows, she says, that if you're a Fester, you're just not going to be a good person. And so she says, I have to work every single day to be the best person that I can be. And if I mess up just once, people are going to say, what do you expect? She's a Fester. Where you guys are just the opposite. You can screw around all day, and people are going to go, well, let him sow his wild oats. He's from a good family. I know his people. He'll do well. So I wanted to present both of those dichotomies. And I don't think that that's something that just happens in small towns in West Virginia. I think that's probably something that happens in neighborhoods in Brooklyn or wherever. But I wanted to show that that dichotomy does exist, and that there are people who, and nowadays it's so funny. I mean, it just gets more difficult every year. And this, again, was 17 years ago, and some of the things that I wrote, I was like, oh, you can't say that. But to write about people who lived in the 1980s and make them have the sensibilities of people that live in 2025 is really hard. Because we said things then, you know, there were words that we used, not even like the worst words. There were just some mid-level words that if we used out loud now, people would be like, you need to go to cancel school. And I used some of those words in there. But it's interesting to me to have to try and, you know, walk this line of being sensitive what happens now, but also fairly representing how we talked and what we did back then. But I have said now, Angus used to be a drunk. And now I think, especially after the opioid crisis, we realize that addiction isn't something that people choose. And so he's a drunk in this book, but now he's just a mean person. And now I have to say, he's a mean person. And this, remember, I'm a comedian. So I say, he's a mean person, and I want you to know that he had parents who loved him, and that they did everything they could for him, and they sent him to counseling, and he had religious people in his life who tried everything they could, and he had teachers and counselors. He just chose to be a bad person. You can dislike him. So that you don't have any reason to think, well, he probably, if someone gave him a chance. No, he's just evil, okay? Just accept it. And we used to just know that. So again, but he's, you know, he represents the bad part, the bad choices that people make, but also Helen, his wife, is a wonderful person. And then Charolais, of course, again, I think is the strongest character in the book. And so what I wanted to show with that is that even out of this dark place, these wonderful things can come, and that we all need to take the opportunity to try and foster that when we get the chance. And so, see, I just kind of had a moral. But the longer I've been telling stories, the more stupid morals creep into my story. So just to wrap that up, again, one of the things I was trying to do in this book is to show what life is like in small town West Virginia. And even though it's a pretty monoculture in this book, I mean, and I pointed out that there's mostly just white people that live in town. And as I say, there were some Methodists, your variety pack of Baptists, and our parents told us that they're worse than Catholics that lived over the hill. But we didn't know if that was true, or if they just told us that so we'd go to bed at night. I don't say that in the book, but I say it now. And I don't make excuses for that. I don't apologize. That's just the way it was, is what I say in my stories. But, you know, I am trying to, hopefully, and I feel like, having read it this week, that I do faithfully represent life, at least from a middle-class white kid, life in rural West Virginia in the 80s. And hopefully now. What else you got?
I made a fresh pot.
Oh, excellent. I will have a cup.
We have a question online.
Okay. Am I just infinite on that screen?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, I have a couple of comments. One, you said you fancy yourself as a humorist, and I think this book is a great compliment to that. I actually laughed out loud. The chapter where Skeeter and Edison get in Skeeter's truck and put the deer masks on and the body on the front of the car. And I was reading that early morning over a cup of coffee in a mug very much like yours, next to my husband. And my husband said, I haven't heard you laugh out loud over quite a long time. So, but I was also reminded about the book by William Jansen. Read his book on writing well. Can you hear me?
Yes.
William book on writing well. He's got a chapter in there on humor, and he said he was a press. He said, "Yeah, how many of my students try to write humor and hopefully somewhere along the line come up with a few truths. But I'm trying to teach my students that you write about truth and hopefully come up with a little humor along.
You're gonna have to say that last part again.
He said when he's teaching writing as a professor, many of his students want to be funny in their writing, come up with a little truth as they're writing. But he said the goal would be to write truthfully and hopefully come up with humor along the way. I think that's what you do. For instance, when the book begins with Skeeter and Edison and their fight, I remember when
We lost you after fighting.
yeah, what am I not coming across clearly?
You were, just once you said fighting, it faded out.
Oh, sorry. When I was a teacher, an English teacher, I asked my students to write stories all the time. But one time I asked them to write a story about how they met their first best friend. The majority of my boys said they met their best friend in a fist fight with one another. Not the girls, of course, but the boys. So that was really interesting to me to read that chapter, and reminded me a lot of things in your book reminded me of things in my own life and things in lives of friends. The other thing that your book reminded me of is I saw in Skeeter and Edison, Huck and Tom.
Good.
All the way through the book, with not just with the setting, the rural, the insulated setting with traditions and prejudices, and then the boys with their mischief and pranks, all the way culminating with Edison, dying to get to see the mighty Mississippi, and then drinking from it too. So I thoroughly enjoyed the book.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the line that made me laugh out loud, one of them, is it's close to the end. It's when we're at the Mississippi, and I quote Mark Twain. Mark Twain said that the River Jordan is as wide as 2 American streets.
That's right.
And I wrote, but he didn't mention which 2.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's great. But
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, Mark Twain has obviously been a huge influence on me. The Tom Sawyer and the Huck Finn books, but also his autobiographical stuff, Innocents Abroad, and especially Roughing It, which I think is his first book, where he goes out to either Silver City or Carson City, Nevada, because his brother is the under mayor or something.
Right.
And he becomes he's working for the paper, and it's when he starts his writing life. But what I really like about the book, so much of what I do depends on exaggeration, and it depends on laying out something that looks real and then bringing you slowly along. I have a dog, my dog's name is Buck, all that's believable. And then suddenly I'm frozen the side of a train by my tongue, and you're laughing because you're thinking, well, isn't that crazy? And then you're like, hold on a second. He couldn't be frozen the side of a train by his tongue. And so I learned this gradual exaggeration, partly from Mark Twain, because in Roughing It, he starts out with these perfectly normal stories. And then the next thing you know, he's like riding a buffalo across the treetops. And you're like, ooh, I fell for that. I won't fall for that again. And then 8 pages later, you're like, fell for it again. So Twain is definitely a big influence. And it's great to hear that you saw that in there.
All right, I have another one.
Okay.
If you came to West Virginia just as a senior in high school, how did you get so attached to the
Oh,
state?
I grew up in South Charleston. We left, I went to all through elementary school in South Charleston. And then my dad moved to Dayton, Ohio, and I lived in Dayton for 4 years. And then I came back to West Virginia for my senior year. So I was gone, well, junior high, I guess 5 years. 5 years. And so then I graduated. I've been here, lived in North Carolina, like every other West Virginian, for a short period, and then came back here in '96. I think we came back, and have been here ever since. So yeah, I live in a house that's not even a mile away from the house that I grew up in. But then, and so we live in South Charleston, but we lived in, my wife and I lived in Fayette County for a long time. I mean, for several years, and then Barber County and Upshur County. So I've been here way most of my life.
Yeah, I like your shirt.
Oh yeah, it's just in Michigan, and I was wearing this shirt, and people were like, "What? I don't get it." So I went. My last name's Lepp, and they're like, "I don't." And one lady bought one. They're for sale in the back. One lady bought one, and she's like, "I don't know what it means, but I bought one." And I'm like, "I know what money means." So. It's also my Substack, if you want to subscribe to my Substack.
All right. Famous rivers you're missing drinking from?
I don't think I've drunk from the Monongahela. No, listen. Here, my drinking from rivers started in the River Kwai in Thailand. I was in the River Kwai, and I was like, "You're drinking from a river in a jungle in a third world country." And then I thought, well, I didn't die. And so I don't know, like take a whole drink. I just put my finger in it like that. So. I know, it's just right there. Maybe I'll wait a little. Get a little further out in the country before I do that. All right, well, anybody else?
I'll go ahead and ask one. Two-part question. Who in your life has been an influence as far as your storytelling and when you were growing up and that kind of thing? And then second of all, who are your favorite current storytellers besides yourself?
Yeah. Thank you for noticing my ego. Some people somehow miss it. I'm like, it's right there. I grew up in a family where the truth was fluid. It was always up to the listener, still is, up to the listener to decide what was true. You could say anything you wanted. I mean, nobody said malicious things, but you could say anything you wanted. And if the listener believed it, that was that. Großpapa, my grandfather, it's German for great father. It has nothing to do with his personal hygiene. Großpapa was born in 1899 in what's now Ukraine. They were Germanic Mennonites. And at the time, my family owned the largest steam tractor factory in the world, Lepp Wallman tractor engine factory. And then the Russian Revolution broke out, and he made his way to America when he got here in 22. But when he was 18 years old, the Russian Revolution broke out. And so I had friends who would say, I hate to go to my grandparents' house because they always tell the same story. Großpapa never told the same story. He would tell me he and his buddy were riding their horses down the street, and they saw a woman being accosted by the man, and by a woman being accosted by a man, and his buddy jumped off the horse and saved the woman. And then the next time I heard that story, Großpapa would say, my buddy and I were riding our horses down the street. We saw a woman being accosted by 10 men, and me and my buddy jumped off our horses. And the next time I heard that story, I alone was riding down the street, and the entire Red Army was attacking the woman. So just sitting around the Thanksgiving supper table, I learned gradual exaggeration and, lying for effect. Großpapa told me one time that he had ridden with Lawrence of Arabia, which made sense. He was in that part of the world at that time. He spoke 7 languages. And I believed that until I was 14 years old. And then I told a newspaper reporter that she was much younger than I, and she wrote in the newspaper that Großpapa had ridden with Laurence Olivier. So we have that going for us too. And then one time Großpapa told me, now this one's tricky, but one time Großpapa told me that I'm related to Snoopy, the dog, and here's how. Brace yourself. According to Großpapa, my grandmother, my Amma's brother-in-law, shot down the Red Baron, and his nickname was Snoopy, and that's where Charles Schultz got the idea. Okay, here's part of the flaw with that. One, we're German. I don't know what a German was doing shooting down the Red Baron. 2, they were Mennonite pacifists. So I don't know what a pacifist Mennonite German was doing shooting down the Red Baron. That's the only flaws in that story. Otherwise, I'm related to Snoop. And then Uncle Paul, Sasha and Rachel, my 2 youngest cousins, they were getting at that age that they were worried that Santa wasn't coming that year. And Uncle Paul said, no, Santa promised he'd always come to our house. And they said, what do you mean? And he said, when I was in Vietnam, it was Christmas Eve, and I saw Santa going across, and he got shot down, and he and the reindeer crashed into the jungle, and I went into the jungle and saved Santa and all of his reindeer, and Santa swore that he would always come to our house. So this is the world I grew up in. These are the people, and then her family, when she was 5, she grew up in Yazoo County, Mississippi, which is difficult for us to understand. But imagine something as flat as that counter for as far as you can see forever and ever and ever. That's Yazoo, except sometimes there'll be a little ditch and then there'll be a creek. So her parents wanted her and her sister to see what not flat looked like. So they went to the Great Smoky Mountains, and they were going up the Great Smokies, and her sister said, oh, my ears just popped. And her mother said, oh, my ears just popped. And Paula said, oh, my ears have not popped. What will happen if my ears don't pop? And her father, God bless him, said, your head will explode. And so we were at her dad's funeral. He worked for the Forest Service for 50 years, 40 years. We were at his funeral, and somebody said to me, how old was Glenn when he died? And I said, I don't know. But once everybody leaves, we're going to cut him in half. So it was a perfect merger of 2 families. Don't trust a thing our children tell you. So I grew up in the storytelling world. That. And then I grew up watching MASH. And MASH is, I mean, turns out it's a little sexist. But other than that, it's if you want to learn the English language, watch MASH. My favorite quote from MASH, and there's so many of them, but my favorite quote is really cold, and they're burning everything. And Henry Blake goes in his office, and he sits down at his desk, but his desk is only this tall, and he reaches to pull out the drawer so he can get his bottle of whiskey, but his drawers are gone. And he says to Radar, he says, Radar, it's a damn shame when they cut off a man's legs and steal his drawers. And then, so MASH, and then I grew up watching the Looney Tunes cartoons, and Daffy and Bugs and the Roadrunner. There were so many visual puns, as well as just everything else that was going on. So those were a huge influence. And then, of course, Mark Twain, Farley Mowat, Edward Abbey, you know, there's a whole long list of authors. And I think a really good book on learning humor, one is Mark Twain's Roughing It, but another is Steve Martin has a little tiny book called Born Standing Up. And I haven't heard it. What I understand is the audio version is him reading it. And so when he goes into his bits, he actually goes into his bits, and apparently he's really impressive. But he talks about starting out as a banjo player and doing magic tricks at Disney, and then he wanted to be a stand-up comedian, and he talks about how he had to learn just to deal with audiences, and how somebody always, when you work in a bar, somebody always drops a tray of glasses at the punchline, and how you have to learn to work the crowd and work around everything else that's going on. And then there's this really part that I hate where he talks about he had to quit doing stand-up because his audiences got too big. I'm like, oh, that's so tough. I hate that for you, boy. But no, it's a really great book on creating humor and writing humor. And then, so nobody knows this, which is why no one's heard of us, but there's this whole storytelling circuit that's going on in the world, and we're not the Moth. We haven't made it onto the radio for some reason. But myself, and there's got to be 100 professional storytellers in the country that are on my storytelling circuit. And right now, there's probably 100 storytelling festivals all around the country. And a lot of them are in the Southeast, but there's the big one, again, is in Jonesboro, Tennessee. And then there's a big one out in outside of Salt Lake City. But they're all over the country. And so some of the storytellers that I love the most. There's a guy named Ed Stuyvesant out of Philadelphia who actually discovered me. He tells a lot of folk tales and fairy tales, but I always say, if you want to learn how to mess up on stage, watch Ed. Because when he messes up, he doesn't stop and get all panicky. He'll just start telling a story that has to do with that mistake. And he'll take you 15 minutes until you forget the original story that he's telling. And then he'll swoop back in and you'll be like, curses, did it again. So Ed is great. I mean, there's so many. A guy named Paul Strickland out of Cincinnati or out of Covington is just this wonderful sort of, I don't know, absurdist, surrealist storyteller. And a woman out of near Atlanta named Carmen Didi, who emigrated here from Cuba when she was 5 years old and tells a lot of stories about growing up Cuban in Decatur, Georgia. And so she thought she had learned English, she always says. And then she found out that not everybody in Decatur speaks English the way everybody else does. So there's a whole bunch of really great storytellers that just from all over that I admire and have learned from.
What was that Ed feller's name?
Ed Stuyvesant. I think it's Stuyvender, unless it's Steievender. But yeah, he's out of Philadelphia. There's where are we? Morgantown. So one of the best storytelling festivals, or Granville, sorry, one of the best storytelling festivals in the country, I think top 3, isn't too far from here. It's in Moorhead, Kentucky. And I mean, for you, it's 4 or 5 hours, I guess. But it's 1/10 about the size of this building. And there's 8 tellers, and we just rotate from Friday afternoon to Saturday night. We just rotate, and you sit there and you get to just see us one after another. And it's 8 of the best storytellers in the country. And it's an affordable festival. The National Storytelling Festival is going to set you back quite a bit of money. It's 30 storytellers in 6/10 the size of this building. And so you got to run around to see your tellers, but Cave Run is, I think it's like $30, and you just get to watch us. And so that's a really good festival if you want to find out more about the sort of storytelling that myself and my coworkers do. I feel like I should look at the hi Zoom people. I want to address you specifically for just a minute.
All right.
All right. Thank you guys so much for having me. Thank you. Are you gonna rent some merchandise?
Oh, yeah, and I was gonna say, and we have some great merchandise back there. I already rated it and bought mine in case y'all tried to steal it before I got to get back there, so I beat y'all to it. But be on the lookout for information for. Oh, I'm sorry. See, I'd do it too. Be on the lookout for information about our future book clubs coming up next year on our website as well as on social media. We'll be announcing those here in the coming days. We do have the next book. We just don't have dates set and that sort of thing. So those will be announced here pretty soon. And once again, thank you everybody for coming out, and thank you, Bill, for coming.
Thank you for having me.